Before we get started with the show, I need to have a quick word with you all. Would you like to have your brand before the tens of thousands of listeners and viewers of the Good Oil podcast? Contact me at cam@goodoil.news.
Hey, now welcome to the show, where the wind's blowing strong and the truth can flow. This is the Good Oil. Catch a vibe today with Cam Slater leading us all the way.
Kathryn Ennis-Carter, welcome to episode 16 of the Good Oil podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Now, we've spoken before.
We haven't.
But it wasn't, I always felt it wasn't nearly long enough. It's not that you can talk a lot. It's just you've got a lot of information that's really fascinating about the inner workings of government departments and all that guff that goes on behind the scenes. And I'm pretty up with the play on what politicians do, but it's in the shadows of what happens in government departments that I'm not so up with the play on. So I thought I'd get you on the podcast and we can use your expertise and talk about what you can talk about and educate the listeners and viewers about what goes on in the background. So why don't we start with you telling everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, what rocks your boat and all of that sort of stuff.
Okay, thank you. Well, I am a governance and public management consultant. And when I tell people that, and then the next question is usually, what does that mean? And by the time I've explained a bit of that, they've usually glazed over. But basically, what my background is I was a ordinary old public servant. Started off as a minion kind of policy analyst.
Back when public service was public service.
Yes, just before all the reforms hit. I came into the New Zealand government in 1985. So that was just before the Longi government and all the public management reforms and all the economic reforms that came with that. And it was actually a very exciting time to be in government in New Zealand because everything was thrown up in the air and we were running around doing all these interesting projects and reforms and what have you. And then I went from central government to regional government. And worked for regional council. And then after that, I went out into consulting. And I did that because I came to a kind of a crossroads in my career. And the next choice was to go either further into the senior management stuff, aim to be a chief executive of a council or something like that, or go back into central government in that kind of senior role. But I had a scholarship at that point, and I'd been to the States for about 3 months on a kind of an organizational study tour. And one of the things that always bothered me about being in senior management positions was having to speak for the organization, where I couldn't really be honest. And often you had to kind of apologize for stuff-ups in the way that people in the organization or politicians wanted to cover for that. And I discovered when I was traveling in the States that I much preferred the idea of being able to go into organizations. I've always had a sort of an ability or a strategic sense of being able to go into an organization and see what the core of what was going on there straight away. And I liked that.
So you're a troubleshooter?
I wouldn't say a troubleshooter, but I've always been quite good at the diagnostic stuff. I can see what's happening. I can see what's happening with people, and I can see how things are going to unfold. So I went down the consulting path, and that kind of came up serendipitously because I was recruited by one of the big consulting firms in New Zealand. And so then I spent a few years doing that, including quite a long period of about 5 years or so when I went out on my own because I got sick of, again, being answerable to big firms.
Now you're only answerable to yourself
Yes, well, pretty much.
and the
I
client.
yes. But in 2003, I went overseas permanently, and I had sought that because I knew New Zealand consultants were in demand overseas, so I had a pathway into that, attached myself on a contractual basis to a New Zealand firm that was doing a lot of overseas work. And from there, once you've got 2 or 3 things on your CV, then I got over the next few years to the position where I was on various databases amongst the international donor companies, organisations that do this kind of work. So I became what's called an international development consultant. So, and I've done that for the last 20 plus years. And my fields of specialisation are governance, public management. I've also done and led a lot of large projects in public sector reform and in public financial management, policy development, those kind of that kind of stuff. And most of the work that I've done for the last 20 plus years has been leading large projects funded by international agencies like the World Bank or the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office or the European Union. And usually there's a consulting company kind of in the middle of that mix.
Yes.
So the donor agencies tender the projects, consulting companies bid for them. You know, they'll ring me up or email me and say, "We're going to do this. Do you want to be in this role or whatever?"
Yeah,
So
I
it
mean, I
goes from
understand you
there.
can't be too specific about what you've done,
Not
but
about
give us an
specific.
idea of the places you've worked on in a broad type of description maybe of some of the projects, just to give people a feel.
Okay, I've lived and worked in 8 countries, but I've provided shorter term assistance to another 9. So I've been all over the place. I've worked in the Caribbean, I've worked in the Middle East, in the Caucasus, I've worked in Africa, won't do that again. I've worked in Southeast Asia and in the Pacific Islands.
Which area did you find the most entertaining or most enjoyable to work?
I spent 5.5 years in Armenia. It was one of my first long-term international projects, and I loved it. I found the culture fascinating. I loved the Armenian people. It's a very unique culture, unique country, unique people, unique geopolitical situation. But the big bonus for me was that there's just fantastic music, and I love the folk music. They have a wonderful philharmonia orchestra, and one of the good things about being in an ex-Soviet country is that one good thing that the Soviets did do for their people was they encouraged art and culture and music. So every weekend
Oh, you've
it
got
was
to entertain the masses while they're working hard for the
yeah,
States.
and make it cheap. They did. So every weekend there was opera, there was ballet, there was orchestra, and there was wonderful folk music, which I love to this day, and jazz clubs. So my memories of Armenia were often, in the middle of winter, going to the jazz clubs until about 4 a.m. in the morning and trudging home in deep snow. It was a fantastic place to be, but I found it intellectually fascinating as well because of the ex-Soviet mindset, and that was fascinating. I still find it fascinating.
Yeah. You worked in the Pacific?
Yes, spent some time in Fiji and in the Solomon Islands.
I was born in Fiji, so that's why I asked you the question.
Yeah, there you go.
It's interesting dealing with government in Fiji.
Yes.
Like I've just had a mate of mine ring up and say he's making a bid for a government department to do a project. What's it like dealing with Fiji? And I said, be prepared for a very, very long wait, but you actually have to go up and show your face
Yes.
right? You can't bid and go, there you go. What do you think of that price? You actually have to go up there and hang around either the Holiday Inn or the GPH for a week or two, and then they'll talk about seeing you. But you've just got to invest that time up there and constantly contacting them every day. And then eventually what will happen is the minister will come down and pick you up and take you to a restaurant, or they'll come and eat down there, and then you know you're getting somewhere. But you have to spend the time in Fiji putting in FaceTime, because they're used to people, just bidding for things and not showing up.
Yes.
They actually want people to understand how everything works in Fiji. And the way everything works in Fiji is slowly.
Yes. Exactly.
The only thing that's fast in Fiji is the coconut wireless.
Yes.
There's a rumor will start in Suva and it'll be in Nandi by the afternoon.
Yeah.
You know,
That was the only project that I've ever done that was part funded by the New Zealand government.
right.
All the other work that I've done has been mostly Northern Hemisphere. Or I have worked in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. But that project in Fiji was very interesting. And I worked with some really clever people there. The local Fijians I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Some really clever people. And we were there. I was working with the Ministry of Finance. It was a finance project. And then I was there for about 9 months doing that. And then they had a coup. They frequently have coups.
The only coups they have in the world where the soldiers don't have any ammunition in their guns.
Yes, but the coup at that time was a legitimate one. It was the first time that they'd had an election after the first Rambuka government. And the new Prime Minister who came in
Garissa.
decided that he didn't like the project, so we were thrown out after 9 months.
Yeah. In Garissa's government was corrupt through and through, working hand in glove with the Methodist Church there was ridiculous things, like there was one electorate up in the north on Viti Levu, which is the main island, that had 7 people in the electorate, voters, and in the election 428 people voted.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yeah, well,
That sort of thing. And then the Methodist Church was going around villages. If they were in the highlands, they'd offer them a tractor. And if they were on the coast, they would offer them outboard motors.
yes.
You know,
Well, I have to say that Fiji was a bit more civilized than the Solomon Islands.
oh, yes.
I had a few months in the Solomon Islands on a AusAid project. I didn't enjoy working with the AusAid people. I felt they were very,
I'll say it, arrogant.
arrogant and rather disdainful of the local people.
That's what I've found. I've done some aid projects in Vanuatu for ADRA, the Adventist Disaster Recovery Agency.
Yes.
We looked at putting in a biofuel plant into one of their schools that they fund, so that they could run the generator for more than 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
Because it's cheaper to use coconut oil, of which the school had a plantation of coconuts.
Yes.
It was cheaper for them to do that. And then the kids could have access to the internet more. They could have access to a whole lot of things. But everywhere I've been in the Pacific, which is mainly Fiji and Vanuatu, and of course I've got close connections in Fiji, New Zealanders are well respected in those places.
Well,
And the Australians and Americans, not so much.
no, not so much. That's quite right. But my experience of the Solomon Islands was that the people who went there as consultants were basically people who were on sabbatical out of the Australian government. They then got there, had no idea.
Sat at the bar and drank gin and tonics.
Well, they mostly went diving. So they were there, for a few months at a time, having a diving holiday, basically. And that's what I mean about, it was fairly disrespectful, I felt, of the local people. And that was a pity. That was a great shame. But the New Zealand contingent were quite respected there. And that's been my experience all over the world. As a New Zealand consultant, generally people have been quite well informed in all the countries that I've worked about New Zealand. New Zealand had, I have to say had, because it's changing now, a good reputation internationally for being a sensible, fairly egalitarian country. And so people were usually happy to have me as a New Zealand consultant, and particularly where there was a British colonial heritage, and where they play cricket.
Yeah.
The first thing was always, "Oh, New Zealand cricket." So
I've got a mate who's trying to get various different political parties in New Zealand to consider an immigration policy of we'll only accept people from countries that play rugby or cricket.
yeah,
But
yeah.
but he's got a problem with that because Pakistan's in the mix there.
Well, I worked in Pakistan, and lived in Pakistan for about 5 years in 2 different segments. I was there for about 18 months first, based in Islamabad, and then I was leading a 5-year project, which was based for the Sindh government in Karachi. So, and I was there for 3 years, and I came home just for a routine trip home at the beginning of 2020 and found myself stranded here because of the COVID
Debacle.
nonsense. And so I ran the last 2 years of that project from here.
Yeah, and so one place I haven't been to and have no inclination to go. I don't know why, but this just is.
Yeah.
I'm more fascinated by things that happened in India in the 1800s or late 1700s
Well,
with Arthur Wellesley and all the battles that there, and some of the things that I collect, firearms that I collect and things like that are from India or former colonial states,
mm,
like Nepal and things like that. So I find it really fascinating. In fact, I'm probably going to try and buy a couple of firearms this weekend that are of Indian origin. So I've got a couple of 3 or 4 talwars and things like that as well. Those are the swords.
yes. Well, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa used to be the place where you went to buy guns if you were going to go to.
I've got a mate who
So-
collects Khyber Pass firearms here because they're
Yes.
usually Franken guns. Yeah. There's the front half of an AK-47 and the back half is an M16 and things like that. And they've cunningly knocked them together. Not sure I'd want to fire them with any great regularity. We'd be unsure of the safety of them, but hey, they look good.
Well, Pakistan actually was a country that did give me a huge amount of education about what really goes on in the world.
Yeah.
It was also my first experience of working in a hardcore Islamic country, which teaches you a lot. But it is a difficult country. Actually, one of the things I was going to mention before, you were talking about corruption in Fiji. And I started off by saying, when people meet me and they ask about what I do, one of there's usually 3 or 4 questions that people always ask. The first is, what do you do? I try to explain it. Then they ask, the second question is always, how did you get into that? So I have to explain, my background in the public sector, and then I'm on this international database of people who do this work. The next question is usually, do you see much corruption? And I quite quickly got to the point where I don't know how to answer that question, because corruption is, it's not even a useful word,
Well,
because corruption is everywhere, including New Zealand.
absolutely.
Countries just have different forms of it. And basically, in many countries, you're talking about simply the way things are done.
Well, it's the thing. People say New Zealand's one of the least corrupt countries in the world, and I said, well, you don't know what you don't know, because it's different. Like corruption in Fiji and corruption that I've seen in Fiji, corruption in places I've worked in Thailand, I've worked in Malaysia, Hong Kong, Singapore. The corruption there is different. And in Thailand, it's very overt, right? For a start, you're told you have to hire this person for this contract.
Mm.
You have to pay them this much. And what they'll do is take what you are doing and make it like they're doing it. And that's how you succeed in this project.
Yes.
And I was told that upfront, this is how it works. And in Thailand, basically, you have to hire a professor from Chulalongkorn University, and he gives the veneer of respectability to it, but he's being paid in US dollars. And that's how it works. And the government department that I was working for, they ironically were an anti-corruption organization, but that's how they told me the project had to operate.
Yes.
Right. And they were detecting, they were wanting to build an anti-money laundering system,
Yeah.
and they were laundering money themselves.
Yeah.
well-
Well, when people ask me that question, mostly they're talking about corruption at the level of, kind of bribes and things.
Yeah, low level corruption.
Backhanders, all that sort of stuff. But I'm not thinking about that. I'm talking about the high level, senior government level, political level corruption that I've seen in my career, which is just everywhere, endemic, part of the system.
It's part of the system. And I was going to raise that with you because my last podcast interview was with Brian Henry, and he's the barrister that's taking Gloriavale apart. And when you hear the stories and how long things have been going on there, over 30 years, things have been going on in Gloriavale, and the government departments and the senior civil servants that are aware of what's going on there.
Yeah.
There's a all of government committee, for example, that just looks at Gloriavale. There's people from Ministry of Education, Ministry of Social Development, Oranga Tamariki, police, right? It's very broad. They all know what's going on, but there's no action.
Yes.
And various ministers of various governments over 30 years. So what we've had the Bolger government, we had the Helen Clark government, then we had the John Key government, then we had the Ardern government, and now we've got the ministers of the Luxon government. They've all been aware about what's happening in Gloriavale. And then you see Christopher Luxon come out and say, oh, he's, concerned for what's happening at Gloriavale. And in the same breath, in the same interview, he's crapping on about the children of Gaza with far more vehemence and far more willingness to do anything rather than deal with 400 kids who are being constantly abused, both physically, mentally, and in many cases sexually abused. And nothing happens. And I can only put that down to a form of managerial corruption in these government departments.
It's that, and it's also basically those kind of things exist because of the networks of power and influence that people are hooked into. Somebody's connected to somebody, somebody's connected to somebody else, and it just works like that. And what I try to tell people is that government is basically all over the world, everywhere, doesn't matter what country, it just takes different forms, is a system of patronage.
Yep.
It's who's connected to who and what keeps the system
So
going.
the same people get appointed to
Absolutely.
inquiries, the same people who get appointed to manage some disaster or whatever happens. It's the same people every time because they're connected.
Yes. But if you can understand it as a patronage system, and this is not anything new, this is
It's
history
been there forever.
back to, the earliest forms of civilization. It's the connections to who has power and influence. And the forms of patronage, are different in a modern society. So that patronage can exist in people basically just being enrolled in the system, employed. So their livelihood depends on it. They get sucked into, the sort of cover-up stuff that goes on, or the dishonesty, or the connections with whoever, whatever influence is relevant.
The awarding of contracts.
Yep.
Yeah, you look at Whānau, for example, the patronage that goes on there, where the Tamahiri Empire was, scraping millions and millions of dollars through various different entities out of the government.
And what's come out about that? Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. What's actually happening? Nothing.
Nothing. Because there'll be people in those government departments that awarded contracts that are cousins or nephews or something related to somebody somewhere, and so we can't really rock the boat because that would pick a scab off we don't really want to do.
Mm.
And this is what the difficulty that I have being a political commentator and engaging with people. I get asked all the time by people, why can't the minister do this and why can't the minister do that? And they don't understand that ministers are actually quite powerless. They only know, they don't know. Like if someone's appointed as the Minister of Education, like Erica Stanford, for example, she seems to be quite competent, but she only knows what her officials tell her.
Yes.
Right. So she only makes decisions on what they're doing. And I've seen this time and time again, particularly in health. Right. So
Yes.
I've seen ministerial officials write amongst themselves that if we do this, this could pose a legal problem for the government where the government could be sued. But we won't talk about that in this position paper that we take to the minister. We'll just put it in a bullet point on page 4 somewhere in the risks. And we won't highlight it, even though we've had 57 meetings to discuss this. They then go to a minister who on paper is supposed to be smart. That was Aisha Viral, who knows about health apparently. And they rubber stamp what the officials want. It's not the minister's policy. It's not that party's policy. It's health officials have decided this is what they want to do, and this is the tactic they're going to use, and we want our minister to rubber stamp it, so we need to provide the evidence to the minister so that they can rubber stamp it. And there's no questioning by the minister. There's very few ministers question. In my experience, right, and I've known a lot of ministers over time. The only minister I know, 2 ministers that I know who have absolutely questioned what officials have told them are Judith Collins and Maurice Williamson. Maurice Williamson has a master's in MSc, and they were coming to him talking about radio spectrum, and we need to do this, minister, and we need to do that, minister. And he said, well, that's rubbish, because he knew.
Yeah.
Right? He was one of the few ministers who actually knew what they were talking about.
Yes.
And we don't see enough of that because, again, patronage, especially in the Labour Party, if you're friends with the Prime Minister, well, then you get the cushy job.
That's right.
Right? There's 5 of us at the top of the party. National's no different, actually, with Luxon. And if you're in the in crowd, you're a minister. If you're in the out crowd, you're a backbencher. The difference is $150,000 a year.
Well, that's how government works. And what you're touching on is something I try to explain to people, but we're hampered a lot in talking to ordinary people. I hate to use that term, but just, people who are not in the political scene, they're not in the government scene. It's very difficult to explain to people how it all works. And I try to tell people about the 3 branches of government. If I ask that question, most people won't know the answer. But we're talking about the Parliament, the executive, which is the public service, and the judiciary, the courts.
Mm.
And the executive is by far
The most powerful. Because they stay there even when the government changes.
Exactly.
And this is why we should really have an American system. Right? When the government changes, the heads of department change.
Well, that has advantages and disadvantages. And when people ask me about the American system, I try to explain it. But most people don't realize that the president is the head of the executive, not the parliament. And that's what's different from the Westminster system that we have.
The president chooses who his cabinet is, and they're not senators.
No.
And they're not congressmen.
Yeah. And the disadvantage that has is that, of course, immediately there's the opportunity for
patronage.
Obvious patronage, because these people are appointed rather than elected.
But from a policy perspective, You've got a president that's elected on a platform. So he selects ministers, or secretaries. They are Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War now, Treasury Secretary, etc. Those are political appointments to ensure that the policy platform that the president was elected on is delivered by the second branch of government, which is Congress.
Yes. But then the complication with that is that the president has to get those executive orders through the Congress.
Correct.
Now, the American system is set up with so many
Checks and
checks and
balances.
balances that it's almost unworkable. And, like in New Zealand, we never get to a situation where, like they do in America, where a number of times they get to the point where the Congress hasn't voted the budget. The budget comes through from the president, through the executive. And if Congress balks at that, and, they can go on for months and they end up in a situation where they don't pay the public servants because it hasn't gone through Congress. We can never have that situation because our heads of departments and ministries are the cabinet ministers who are elected members of parliament. So there's pros and cons for each situation.
Yeah, we've got in our system a bunch of fifth columnists who work in the civil service who have their pet projects that they want to put through. And if they get a hostile government to their pet project, well, they just park it for a little bit and wait till the natural cycle of politics happens and that government's gone and a new one comes in and they go and hoodwink them.
Yeah. When I first came into government in the mid to late 1980s, it wasn't so much like that. And in fact, we were, as a new public servant coming in, you were lectured about the importance of neutrality. You're supposed to not have any political affiliations with any particular party.
Other than the PSA union.
Well, yes.
Which is affiliated to the Labour Party.
Now, I like to think and talk a lot about government then and now, because what we have now is government is infested with activists for all kinds of causes, and I've seen the way that works. Those people work their way, they get into the system, they work their way up the system, they get into senior
I
jobs.
think worm is a better word than work.
Yes, probably. But we're seeing that, and that's why you've got so much ideological stuff being pushed through government. And the same thing is happening in local government now. Recently, I've been focusing on local government, and the same thing is happening with the executive in local councils as it is in central government, that the staff are driving agendas. And the councils, the elected members end up like a rubber stamp, endorsing that. And the longer they're in that system, the worse it gets.
Well, we've just seen an example of that recently where a teenage kid took the Auckland Transport to court over these, raised crossings and speed bumps and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's discovered in the discovery process that the officials had this standard form that they would put forward to the elected members that had pro forma statements in it about the necessity for this, bump that's going to annoy everybody, because they, for some reason, the council, AT, decided we need bumps on the road. We need, we've had flat crossings for I don't know, 100 years. And now all of a sudden they all need to be raised. It's ridiculous. At a huge cost of about $500,000 for each bump.
Oh, I know.
And
those bumps, driving around Wellington now, there's so many bumps and road cones and...
There was a time when they built roads and they had to be smooth.
Well, I've just recently come back from Uzbekistan, and what was very interesting there, that's a very interesting country, by the way, but what was interesting there is there was not a road cone in sight, and they seem to understand that the population knows how to drive around roadworks without millions of road cones.
Well, we used to have that here. right? And then managerialism and safetyism took over.
Yes.
Now when I lived in Takapuna, I'd often go down to Devonport to pick Kirsty up from the ferry there. And for a period of about 3 or 4 months, there was literally 5 kilometers of road cones for 4 or 5 holes,
I know.
you know? It was ridiculous. There was safety fences, there was road cones, there was moving the footpath to one side. Back in the day, it was like, "Oh, there's a hole there. Oh, well, what should I do?" Well, walk around it.
Yes, exactly. Uh, Well, in Tashkent, all they have is a sign, with a shovel sign like we used to have. And everybody drives around, and they're driving like dodgems. It's quite a fascinating place.
It's absolutely ridiculous, the safetyism that's now in place for everything, where you see somebody working inside a building surrounded by road cones inside a building.
Yes.
We've got the ridiculous situation where AT hits all the politicians down to go for a ride on their train and makes them all wear hard hats and safety vests. Are they going to make the passengers do that? Well,
Well,
the answer is no. So why do they make the politicians do it? It's ridiculous.
oh well, because that's part of the show, you see.
But why do the politicians entertain it?
Yeah,
Winston didn't. He said, "I'm not wearing that."
yes, he took. I saw that.
But then they made a big fuss about it. But
Yes.
you see them on the opening of a new road, and there they all are. There's usually 5 ministers, all standing around, like stunned mullets, standing behind the person who's actually speaking, nodding like Pavlov's dogs, all with their hard hats and their vests on at the opening of a road.
Yeah, well, but it's part of reinforcing that, and it also becomes part of the sort of authoritative propaganda, that everybody endorses.
So the
as
government
kind
knows
of-
best, and we
Ye-
know what's good for you.
Yes, yes, and that's why the same reason why cabinet ministers turn up, being filmed in gene technology labs with white coats on. It's all to do with, this veneer of authority that you give things.
I mean, I saw a classic example of the dumbing down of New Zealand's public as a result of safetyism and all of this sort of thing, where there was a football match at Eden Park, and I think some chips caught fire and then one of the fast food places or something. Anyway, the fire alarm went off. And there was this guy being interviewed on TVNZ, and he said, "The fire alarm went off and nobody told us what to do."
Yes.
What, what, what sort of a moron is he?
Yes.
He wanted someone to tell him what to do. Well, if I heard the fire alarm, I'd look around. Is there any smoke? No.
Mm.
Oh, fuck it. I'll stay here
Ye-
and watch the game. If there's smoke, we're leaving.
Yes.
And we're leaving whichever way I can get out the fastest.
Yes.
Why do we need people to tell you what to do?
Well, one of the things that's taken place for me recently is that my academic background is in social sciences, sociology and psychology. I've always been fascinated with how people think and why, and the way society works and that kind of thing. And so when I was going through university and doing psychology, one of the things that every stage one psychology student learned about was Stanley Milgram's experiments. And without going into the detail of that, basically the conclusion that arose from that was that he found that about 65 to maybe 70% of the population would follow instructions if they perceived that it was coming from people with authority. And they would do that even when it got to the point where it was overriding their own moral code. And that because of that, a huge, like 2/3 of the population are basically not in a position to readily recognize when that authority has become malevolent.
We saw that with COVID, didn't we?
Absolutely. That
Yeah.
was the ultimate
Oh, it was higher than that. It was more like 85% of the population
Yes.
did what they were told.
yeah,
And it was a very small percentage, of which I was part of, that said, "You know what?
yeah.
That's stupid." When they had rules like, if you go to a restaurant, when you sit down, you can take your mask on. But if you stand up, and to go to the bathroom, you have to put your mask on.
Oh,
So
yes.
COVID floats around apparently over the head of a seated
Yeah,
person,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. So you had to have your mask on when you came in the door. But over there where you can sit down, you're going to eat your meal, you can take your mask off. Oh, so COVID's not over there then.
Yeah, or they put these screens up at the supermarket, right? Remember the screens at the supermarket? And the staff would stand behind the screens until you went to pay.
Yes.
And then you handed over what?
Mm,
A card or cash. Well, what was the screen for?
yes. But you see, they positioned it beforehand on the threat. They made the population afraid of this
Bug,
of this
cold.
extreme virus, that we were all going to die from. And so then,
But fuck all died.
yeah, well, we know that. But, it's getting back to where the depressing thing about the general population is apparently there's only about 10% of people who really think for themselves.
Yeah, well, that's what I always say to people.
The
People
rest,
say, "Oh, why do people do this?" And I always say to them, "Because people are stupid." And they say, "Oh, that's a bit high-handed, Cam, saying that people are stupid." Well, they are. We've proved it. We had a social experiment, and from 2020 to 2022, it was a social experiment that proved that people are stupid.
yes, I don't like to be quite so unkind as that,
Well,
but
I'm going to say you got to be cruel to be kind.
but I am getting increasingly fed up with the observation of stupidity that just seems to be rampant.
Oh, it's growing.
Yes.
It's growing. Stupidity abounds everywhere.
Yeah.
That's why road cones are out of hand, because nobody said, "Whoa, stop."
Yes.
Right? This is dumb. No one said that's stupid or you're stupid or anything like that. We've got this, got to take the forelock and do what we're told mentality. And Kiwis didn't used to be like that.
No, we didn't used to be like that.
Sorry to interrupt you. I need to have a quick word with you about sponsorship. If you like what we're doing, and tens of thousands of people are viewing these podcasts every week, then you need to put your brand before our audience. Contact me at cam@goodoil.news. Now back to the interview.
There's so much interesting psychology now about the herd mentality and groupthink and why it takes over and why people are followers. And, maybe we have to be a bit kinder about not saying, well, it's just wildfire stupidity.
No, I don't know about that. I mean, I worked for a company that developed some software based on pathing analysis, and it was really fascinating software. It looked at the relationship between data. It was about the transactions, not about the elements of data. And it was about velocity and size of the transactions, not the elements of the data. So, for example, an insurance policy, you've got a policy number, you've got a person who's taken out their policy, they've got a telephone number, they've got an address, they've got a vehicle with a registration. Those are the elements of the data. And what binds all of those together are financial transactions. Right? So it's great for detecting fraud, because if you get this cluster of several people all sharing the same telephone number, the same address, but having multiple claims in a short amount of time, it stands out. You can see it in the data. But the professor that developed that software, he had studied psychology basically and why people do things. And he had gone over to places like Sweden and Scandinavian countries where they'd build an apartment building, but they wouldn't put any paths in for several months. And then what they would do is they would see where people had walked, and then they would put the paths in. Whereas here, we build the apartment, we build a path from the door to the footpath, and nobody walks on that pathway because they want to go left or they want to go right, and so there's diagonal marks in the grass where everybody's walked.
Yes.
And that's how he developed the software. He says, well, that's what people actually do, not how we think they should do things.
Yes. But now we've got just not far from where I live, there's new footpaths, and this is a rural area. And they've put on a corner between a street that goes down to the beach and what used to be the main road, State Highway 1. They've put new footpaths in there, and they are massive. And hardly anybody is walking on those footpaths. And yet they've they've done that because somebody's got a book in government offices that says footpaths now need to be this
There's a
wide.
standard.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's chewed up in enormous. So now you've got this narrow road with these enormously wide footpaths, and it's just ridiculous.
I know, it's like cycle lanes, right?
Oh.
Oh, we're gonna put cycle lanes, down this street. We're gonna remove a lane. We're gonna make cyclists like which cyclists? Right? How many cyclists? We've now got a whole lane dedicated to cycles. I bet I could stand there all day and not see a single cyclist on most of the cycleways that are in Auckland, for example.
Yeah,
On Waiheke, where I live, it's even worse. They've got cycleways, and then the cycleways end, and so they've painted cycles with a little arrow in the middle of the road. So guess where the people with that are cycling end up riding? In the middle of the road, because that's where they've put the sign,
yeah.
right? It's insane.
Yes, it is insane. But I think, you were saying before, why don't more people stand up and say, this is dumb, why are we doing it? Let's stop. It's partly, I think, what seems to me to be ramping up now is the neutralizing people from doing that.
Well,
So,
and giving them a name like, "Oh, you're just a crank.
yes,
Oh, you're
th-
racist."
this has really increased. I mean, it started, I think, New Zealand, we sort of started to become aware of it during the Helen Clark years more and more. And the
Polarization.
media started to reflect it. So there was this group of things that there was a right opinion about and a wrong opinion. And those things were things like immigration. You couldn't say anything about immigration because you were xenophobic. You couldn't say anything about all the money that was going to Māori organisations.
You can't say about all the money going to Paris with the climate change
Yes.
thing.
Yes, exactly. You can't. You're a climate denier. So these tactics for neutralising any opposition from the 10% who do think is becoming much more rampant, and the whole thing about mis and disinformation has become an incredibly useful for those people who want to neutralise any
They're
opposition.
petty fascists, really. They just want to
Yes,
control and police what we say, think, and do.
but it's become a very useful tactic to do that. Oh, that's misinformation.
Yeah, well, I mean, my answer to that is says who?
Yes.
Like it's like the trans debate, right? No one was allowed to say that men in frocks aren't women, right? We all have to sign on to the delusion that men in frocks, if they decide they're a woman, they're a woman.
Yes.
Nobody says you're fucked in the head.
Yes.
Yeah,
But you see, the group, this is where the group think, herd mentality. People like to be in the in-group.
they go along to get along.
Yes, that's right. But it's deeper level psychology than that, because most people want to be in the in-group. This is why you get, bullying cliques in schools and, even in primary schools. Most people don't want to be different. That they want to be part of the group. They want to be.
I've been different all my life.
Me too.
I've never complied or, when I was at secondary school, and it was a pretty, dog eat dog secondary school. It was one of the top schools in New Zealand, but there's a pecking order. And if you're in the third form, don't get stations above your position. And your position is you're new. So if you get lippy, you'll get hung on hooks, or any number of, punishments that were meted out to. Very often there wasn't a hiding or anything like that. It was more like mockery and things like. By the time you got to the fifth form, you'd kind of like gone up a few pegs and then you
Yeah.
worked it out. And these days it would all be called bullying, but I viewed it as they were sorting out the pecking order. The pecking order is real,
Yeah, of course. It
right?
is.
There are people that are better than others. There are people that are dumber than others. There are people who are genetically stupid and retarded. And they do stupid things. And often when they do stupid things, they have bad consequences or poor outcomes.
Yeah.
That's life. And we've stopped telling people that they're stupid. And I think we've got worse. So it's really strange, the whole situation.
I think we have got worse, but if I think about my own background, I was a state house kid, and the primary and intermediate schools I was at didn't actually it didn't factor. I really wasn't aware of it until I got to high school, and then I had a brain, so I was in top streams. And then I started to become aware of the kids who came from affluent families, and that was different.
Mm.
And because I was different, um, and what I started to notice, and when I think about it now, about the pecking order you're talking about, the kids from the most affluent families, they all went into areas like law, medicine, elite science. The middle class kids became teachers and accountants and all that sort of thing. And then, the lower streams, you're all directed into manufacturing or sort of lower clerical work. And I
Well,
had,
so that's how I went through school as well. It was
yeah,
the same. If you were smart, you're in the top classes. I was in the third to top class, and I had teachers tell me privately that we were the worst class to teach because we were bright enough to be in the top two classes, but smart enough not to do the work. Uh, So we did enough to pass,
yeah,
but and more than we needed to do to fail,
mm.
right? But so they could never get us to stretch, even though in very many cases we were brighter than the teachers themselves.
Well, a lot of kids who were like that went on to find that university, where everything was much more self-directed, was an environment that suited them, because then you were a bit more in control of it. And a lot of kids who were like you then went on, to do really well at university.
I was the opposite of that. I went to
You did.
university. I went to university to eat my lunch, and but I had a politics professor at university, and I mean, he knew about Plato, and he knew about all the classical political things. He knew fuck all about reality. And I just got, I brought up in a political family. I knew how shit happened. I'd seen policy changes happen, from the simple experience of my grandmother telling a cabinet minister off. Right? No, you should do this.
Yes.
Right? Or my mother saying to a cabinet minister, "Oh, you should do that," and next minute it's policy. So I saw how politics actually works. It's people with influence,
Yes.
right? Who get in the ear of someone who doesn't know any better.
Yeah.
And then they do what oh, that's a good idea. I think I'll run with that.
Yeah. I've seen that working, when you're working in government, and getting back to government, um, policy development kind of happens in two ways. And one way is, the cabinet minister gets a rush of blood to the head about something, and then it comes down through the
And then creates work streams, and then you get committees and
yes, and what have you.
6 months of meetings.
Yes. And then, the executive sometimes works out how to discourage
Mm.
that cabinet minister from that particular idea. But the other way it works is it comes up from the bottom as well. So somebody gets some idea. This is why activists have been so important in the kind of government that we're looking at now. And because, there's a germ of an idea that starts at the bottom and it gets advocated up. And next thing
And it's
know,
small stuff
the
often.
middle manager has often small stuff.
A good example would be starting every email with, kia ora, or, Tanakwe, or
Oh,
something like that, and finishing it with ngā mihi.
yeah,
Right, and I like fucking with the civil servants that send me emails like that, because I was born in Fiji, so I just reply to them bula and vanaka vakalevu,
yeah.
and watching them unhinge themselves, because they've assumed that Tanakwe is good enough and Ngā perfectly okay, and they're getting somebody to respond to them in a different language. All of a sudden they go, I'm so sorry, and that's what I'm just playing with them. I'm like a cat with a mouse.
Yeah.
It's fun because they've got this entrenched position, But that's the little stuff which then graduates into the renaming of departments, which then graduates into having karakia in front of every meeting. It then graduates to having Waiata Wednesdays. I mean, I know of a government department that has Waiata Wednesdays, where the whole morning is taken up singing 10 guitars. You
Yeah,
know?
and somebody was telling me it also graduates to things like, somebody was telling me recently about, was down in Invercargill of all places. Somebody was telling me about primary school class, um, who were going out on some field trip for the day, and they had been, they're indoctrinated into this karakia. You do
Mumbo
a
jumbo,
karakia
yeah.
several times a day and what have you. But the teacher was telling them that, and as part of the Māori spirituality that's overlaid into all this stuff now, the teacher was telling this class of primary kids that they had to do their karakia to the atua, the Māori atua, who's the sun god, so that they would have a nice sunny day for their day out.
And Invercargill.
In Invercargill.
Chances of a sunny day? Slim to none.
Chances of a sunny day.
But it's ridiculous. I mean, can you imagine the howls of outrage if you got a fundamentalist Christian boss in the civil service? Now, he would never have risen to that position, but let's say he did, right? And they said, well, we're going to start every meeting with the Lord's Prayer. There would be howls of outrage.
Yes.
Howls of outrage that we're bringing religion into our civil service. We're supposed to be neutral. We're supposed to be this and that and everything. But no one says a word about karakia. And they don't say a word about karakia or any of the other nonsense that is brought up, because you get othered. You get smeared. You get slandered. You get called a racist. It's all designed to shut you down.
You get discredited, and that's what is happening very much. That's why, and we now have a war against alternative opinions. And it's being justified in our political environment, at central government and at local government.
And geopolitics as well.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
You look at, the situation in the Middle East at the moment, right? Where you've got people like Emmanuel Macron, who's come out overnight saying that it's appalling that Israel has assassinated 7 Hamas leaders who were in Qatar, and they've bombed Qatar, and this is appalling. Well, and then you get Keir Starmer saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, there was a time when the French and the British said we don't negotiate with terrorists, and now they want to give the terrorists a state. It's insane.
Yeah.
The only democracy in the Middle East, and the Western democracies are abandoning them, all because they imported people from cultures that aren't
From Europe. Yeah.
And now they've got a substantial amount of their population that are kicking up Bobsy Die in their streets, and they're scared of the incendiary nature of those volatile, violent people that they've imported willingly.
Yeah. And, the tragedy of that, and again, it goes back to, I seem to be spending more and more time thinking and talking about psychology these days, but
It helps.
it does help. And, where to start with this? There's so many things happening geopolitically, and because I've spent a lot of time in that environment, I find what's happening now with the Middle East situation. I'm not just talking about Gaza and Israel. And most people look at that, and of course they sit down, in front of the TV, they see these
A homogenized
bombings.
version that's official speak for how they want us to think.
Yeah, but the way that it's promoted is polarized. So Israel has to be all bad, and therefore you can't say anything against Hamas. So, we have the Islamic shoplifting paedophile party in Parliament. And that's the argument. Uh, Gaza is just innocent victims. They don't want to say or even
There's
say
2
anything
million
about
there's 2 million
Hamas.
people in Gaza, and there were 200 hostages. Not a single person in Gaza said, "Look there, that's where they are." Not one,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Not
And
one
you know,
said,
I
"That's
mean,
where the hostages are."
but most people who have any either half a brain or any sense of decency are horrified by seeing lots of people being killed.
It's awful. War is awful.
Of course, it's awful, but you get this. People get so polarized in their views that this has to all be bad. This is all evil, and there's no evil on that side. They're just
But also, the polarization leads to extreme positions. So you get the people who support the so-called Palestinians, right, come out and say Israel's committing genocide. And these are the same people who are saying Israel needs to feed all these people. And Israel is feeding all those people. There's millions and millions of tons of food that is going through the Israeli border. Egypt, on the other hand, has a border that's got much bigger fences, right? Minefields and everything, and 2 army divisions protecting that border with Gaza, and they won't let a single thing through there other than Helen Clark. And she goes through the border at Egypt, says it's terrible, Israel needs to be letting food in, but Egypt won't let food in,
yeah.
you know?
But I had a wonderful friend who sadly died a few years ago. He was a historian, and one of his great quotes to me was, "Never underestimate the usefulness of hypocrisy."
Well,
And
that's how I describe the Green Party, they've always got a cloak of hypocrisy
but
and a shield of sanctimony.
you can see it now, and you know when I was a teenager and read 1984,
It was a warning then.
well, it was a warning then, but you kind of read that and thought, oh, I mean, if you had, again, half a brain, you could see, even from the trends that, we were capable of seeing as teenagers back then, you could see how that could happen. You could even recognize
And then we
aspects of
saw
it.
it happen.
And now it's here. And so,
How, Jacinda Ardern read 1984 when she was at school. I'm sure every school kid
yeah,
did, right? But she didn't see it as a warning. She saw it as a manual.
yes, yes. But there's so much now that is completely Orwellian. And one of them, and this hasn't happened overnight, but if you back to the 1960s, Israel was like fated internationally. It was a place to go. People went there to do, work on kibbutzes and what have you. And slowly, and this is why I talk about um, the influence of countries like Turkey. Nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about the Shia Sunni divide.
Mm.
Nobody talks about the influence of the Arab League. And I'll
Influence of Iran.
and I'll give you a great example of total hypocrisy in geopolitics. And you can compare it, if you like, to the Gaza situation, which, by the way, could have been solved years ago if Egypt had agreed to
Take it back.
yes,
It was theirs.
it was theirs, to either take it back or give those people access to citizenship back in Egypt.
But this is the problem,
or
right?
dual citizenship.
Nobody wants the Palestinians. None of the neighbors want
Well,
them.
that is, and as an extension of that question, you can ask why all the immigrants from Islamic countries, why do they not want to go to some of the more affluent Islamic countries? They don't. They want to go to the West. Why?
Because we're in a war.
We're in a war, but also because those people are smart enough to know what sits underneath some of those, like take United Arab Emirates.
Emirates, yeah.
you go to Dubai. I mean, the wealth is just obscene, excessive, and yet it sits on top of this 7th century culture and all the prohibitions and what have you that go with that. But what I was going to say about hypocrisy, particularly in this geopolitical context, I was talking about Armenia before, and Armenia, I told you I loved my 5.5 years there. It's a country, I have a whole extended family of people there. It's very close to my heart, and the people there are very beloved to me. Met all the people I knew and worked with. And of course they have the history of the Armenian genocide,
Yep. That nobody talks about.
which nobody talks about, and which Hitler was known to quote. When they were developing the final solution, he was quoted as saying, "Who now remembers the Armenian genocide?" So in Turkey, which is also a country, I spent a year living in Turkey, which everybody thinks of as a very benign
No, they're not.
Muslim country. But the difference between, people always, if I mention countries I've worked in, people always tell me about their tourist experience going to those countries. So everybody thinks, and Turkey is a wonderful place
They
to
talk
go,
about going
as you
in
said.
balloons and going to Ephesus
Yes,
and all the places on the coast, but
Well-
we're all in the center of.
but I always wonder why people want to tell me about their. I guess it's because people need something from their own experience, to be able to relate to something. We don't seem to be able to learn much except we learn it directly from our own experience. But I spent a year in Turkey, and doing the work that I do is very different from going to somewhere as a tourist. So I'm working with the government. Sometimes I'm working inside the government.
Yeah.
And then you see what that society is really like. So with the background of the Armenian genocide, when I lived in Armenia, I encountered a people who were ex-Soviet.
Mm.
They had hundreds of years of being occupied or dominated, or some invading country.
It goes right back
taken
to the
them over.
Romans.
So they had a mindset that government was sort of vaguely hostile. And they have a joke, that Armenians always know how to break the rules. And that is a fascinating thing, because in New Zealand, we've never had that. We've always sort of had, we might disagree
We've
with
had
different
benign
political-
governments mostly.
Exactly.
We've had no civil war.
Or governments that people think were benign, up until very recently, when people are starting to get the idea that government can be something else. But Armenia in 2020, they part of Armenia, which was at the end of the Soviet period, when Perestroika and Glasnost happened under Gorbachev.
92, 93.
Yeah. So during the Soviet period, all those countries who were part of the USSR, they had been told, we don't need to worry about borders, you're all part of the Soviet Empire. And so, but tribalism always prevails. And so at the end of the Soviet era, Armenia had a war with Azerbaijan over a territory which through the Soviet years had been basically an autonomous region theoretically within Azerbaijan. And Armenia and Azerbaijan had a war over that area called Nagorno-Karabakh, or now they call it Artsakh. And in the early 90s, that war, thousands of people were displaced. Azeris who were living in Armenia went the other way, and that area was basically populated by ethnic Armenians. And so there was a sort of an international stalemate situation where it was never kind of officially recognized that that was ethnically and historically part of Armenia. And it continued for quite a while as that sort of international stalemate. But in 2020, and this gets you to understand how some of this stuff is long in the planning and linked to what we saw manifesting across the globe with the COVID years. In 2020, while the whole international community was distracted with COVID, Azerbaijan invaded that area, Nagorno-Karabakh. And they had another war over it. It ended up with Armenia having to capitulate because Azerbaijan is a huge country, lots of wealth, and they were supported by Turkey, which, by the way, is, I think, in about the top 3 of producers of weaponry in the world.
They make some pretty good weaponry.
Yeah. I found that out when I lived there, that they were in that top 3.
Oh, they are, and their drone technology is, up there as well.
So everybody goes on about Russia and Ukraine. Oh, you can't, they've invaded another country. Well, here we are. Azerbaijan invaded.
It happens all over the place.
And then in 2022, they installed a blockade, and they basically starved the ethnic Armenians in that area out. And it ended up with them all having to flee basically into Armenia itself. But they put this blockade so that supplies couldn't get in. They basically starved something like between 120,000 150,000 people out of their own country. Now that's ethnic cleansing. It's invading another country.
And no one
made a peep. It hardly registered.
People don't understand the geopolitics of Ukraine and Russia. They forget that Ukraine as a country has really only existed for 150 years at best, and up until recently was part of the Soviet Union.
Yes,
right. That's where the Black Sea Fleet was based, and people forget that. And there are ethnic Russians in all those areas. Now, I'm not pro-Russian by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm certainly not pro-Ukrainian either. As far as I'm concerned, they can have at it. But the problem is that NATO is learning lots. And that's what it's all about. That reason why that war started, the reason why everything kicked off there is not because of Vladimir Putin, but because NATO kept breaking promises. And then when it kicked off, you got all of the Western European countries could get rid of their old stock of tanks and missiles and artillery and all of that, refresh their stuff, and watch new tactics take place. And I happen to know that even the New Zealand government is in on it. So we pay money to the Ukrainians, and everyone goes, well, for what? I'll tell you for what. For information sharing on weapon systems and in a modern battlefield. That's the payoff. Now, it's not a humanitarian reason. It's not even a lofty geopolitical reason. We support Ukraine because they were invaded. They're not democratic. Neither's Russia.
no.
It's all about technology sharing and learning.
But we're told, the myth that Ukraine is trying to be a independent, democratic country, and evil Russia invaded them. But the politics relating to NATO and the EU are absolutely fascinating. And people forget that Ukraine, for centuries and centuries, was part of Russia.
Part of Russia.
And Russia will never give up that access down through through Crimea to the Black Sea. It's an important,
which is the same reason why Russia supported Syria and Assad for so long, because it gave them a port on the Mediterranean. They've lost that now, but
but there was an agreement with Gorbachev when the Soviet system collapsed. That NATO,
would make no move east.
yes, and would not encroach into the countries that were on Russia's border. But they have done
They've
ever
done it with
since.
Poland, with Finland, with any number of Estonia,
Yeah,
any number of other countries. They've done it.
as I understand it, one of the things that contributed to uh, the current Ukraine war was NATO doing military maneuvers virtually on the border. So, there's all that in the background. Nothing is
Nothing is as it seems.
Nothing is as it seems, and certainly nothing is black and white, and nothing is as polarized, um, or in terms of one side is evil and one side is the victim. It's never like that. It's always far more complicated, and there's just so much hypocrisy in it all.
Well, hypocrisy. I mentioned Emmanuel Macron in his statement about Qatar. This is the same Emmanuel Macron that praised the United States for killing Osama bin Laden. We don't deal with terrorists,
Yeah.
right? So that's the same Emmanuel. And so the head of Qatar and his 6 minions who just got vaporized, right?
Yes.
He comes out and says, that's terrible.
Yes.
What's changed?
Mm.
Like, I know the French have got a reputation for marching backwards. There's the gold medal holders of marching backwards, the Italians silver and the Argentinians bronze,
Yes.
right? They surrender. I mean, there's even jokes about why does the Champs-Elysees have trees down either side of it? And so German soldiers can march in the shade.
Yeah. But
No.
but we were talking about Orwellian things.
So,
I mean, the EU has been in a war to basically stifle nationalism for decades and decades. And one of the things that happened that was really interesting, and I can't remember exactly when I was overseas somewhere, but anyway, we were watching developments with the French presidential elections, and it got to the point where Marine Le Pen was almost about to take the presidency.
arrested and charged.
And, but before that, Macron popped up out of nowhere, an ex-Rothschild banker, and suddenly he's the president. This is where the whole network of geopolitical influences and relationships are so important for people to understand.
Yeah, I mean, people are very simplistic about things, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about governance, so we can shed a little light on how things go in government. That the civil service are actually all powerful, the politicians are temporary, and often the politicians don't know what they're talking about, and so they get the wool pulled over their eyes,
Yes.
and the civil service carries on.
Yes. One of the unfortunate things that's happened is that, and it's over the last 5 years or so, it has started to affect the work I do. Is that one of the good things? I'm not a supporter of the economic reforms that happened in New Zealand in the late 1980s, because we went to this free market economics, neoliberal classical economics, and the march of privatization.
You see, I supported that at the time,
Yeah.
but now with the benefit of hindsight,
Yes.
and I was implacably opposed to Robert Muldoon, right, and all that he did. But when you look at it, all of these people driving around in their smug, electric cars, they're all powered by the Think Big projects that their parents opposed.
Yeah.
And he was actually giving us the most important thing in society that you can have today is energy independence.
Yeah.
And yet we've got successive governments that have ignored our natural resources and decided to import natural resources, of which we have hundreds of years of stuff that we can dig out of the ground in oil, gas, and coal, and import inferior quality products from overseas at great expense.
Well,
And that's all part of that neoliberal thing, and
yes.
that's kind of like moved me away from that and started looking with more open eyes as what New Zealand could have been had
Yes.
we had some sort of in-between situation. We needed
Yeah.
to get rid of subsidies and we needed to get rid of all of those sorts of things, because if a government subsidizes something, you don't actually have a business, because if it takes the subsidies away, your business ceases to exist. So we need to clean that area up and some of those things. But, handing over, I don't also agree with the state owning things, because when the state owns things, they do it poorly. And we've got ample evidence of that with every communist country known to man.
Yeah.
And it was the same here. It used to take weeks to get a telephone connected by telecom until it was privatized, and then it was days. So there was things that needed to be done. It was the way they were done and the way that a very few people, number of people, probably 10 or 20 families in New Zealand benefited so enormously from that,
Mm.
that they stopped living in New Zealand because they
Yeah.
didn't have to.
So in understanding that, I think, when I was actually working in central government, um, I was so involved with the public management reforms aspect of the whole change that
Yeah.
reforms that took place at that time. I started to see the significance of the economic reforms only when I went um, to a regional council situation. But the dogma at the time was everything will be solved by privatization, and because then we'll have more competition. And I realized the fallacy of that when I saw how ridiculous.
Well, let's just look at that for a second, right? So more competition. We created a number of power companies. Has our power prices gone down?
No.
Right. We've got new media to compete with the state media, but we've ended up with basically 2 TV channels, 2 major radio networks, 2 major print media networks. Has the state of our media improved from
No.
competition?
But you see what,
Same with cell phones or telecommunications companies.
and it's always going to go that way because basically
Small country.
the logic of free market economics is the law of the jungle, essentially, and the big players always take over the smaller players, and so you wind up with these huge
Look at
corporates.
Supermarkets.
It's the way it goes.
Is it a duopoly in
Yeah.
supermarkets?
So now, since those reforms in New Zealand, and it's happened not only here, of course, we were an experiment for going holus bolus towards neoclassical economics, and the extent of privatization that's taken place not only in New Zealand but internationally means that now there's been a huge transfer of public assets and public wealth to the private
Private.
sector. And then what happens is that's the basis for the kind of rentier capitalism that we now have all over the world, where the rest of the population is ransom to paying rent, basically, for the use of those assets.
Yeah. Which brings us to New Zealand politics. Now, we don't have enough time to talk about this, but I'm interested in your insights of where we're at now. And again, I'm looking at, we had these reforms in the 90s. We had, Bolger had a rush of shit to the brains and decided that we'll give MMP a go.
Yes.
We had a referendum, which was rigged. Instead of having MMP and STV and a binary, or MMP versus first past the post and a binary choice, they gave us 4 choices, which meant that it diminished people's voting capacity. People might have voted for STV. If you're smart, you'd voted for STV. And then we had this what I call hopium, that MMP was going to have political parties work together and we'd have a much nicer form of parliament. The reality is again, like you just mentioned, in the private sector, the big players remained big, the little players got eaten or disappeared, and we ended up with a 2-party government, essentially with a couple of hangers on, and it's been like that for more than 30 years now.
Yeah. And of course, MMP has given us a situation where everybody agreed with the logic of proportional representation, but it does mean that you get, small minority weirdo parties in Parliament with the kind of chaos that they can create that we've got now. And one thing I'll tell you just in closing up, we should have another conversation about
Oh, we can easily do another podcast.
there's lots more things we can talk about, particularly on the subject of New Zealand politics and governance then and now.
We've got a governance problem in New Zealand.
We have a major governance problem.
We've got a talent pool that is as shallow as a bird bath in summer.
Yes.
And
I've seen that
we've got
in my work.
managerialism, where we've got a prime minister whose claim to fame is he managed a monopoly, was a salesperson in a monopoly, or a monopsony situation, and that's his claim to fame,
Yeah.
right? He's not a businessman's ass. He worked for a company that was owned by the government.
Yes.
So they could spend with gay abandon
Yes.
and do things. He could be as woke as all hell, and he was. And somehow he's going to be a good prime minister. The guy's an idiot. And I've met a lot of politicians in my time, and it takes a lot for me to call someone an idiot, particularly when they're the leader of the National Party.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we've got to a situation now where we are no longer we cannot think of ourselves as an independent country.
We're certainly not a first world country.
We are ransom to the international elites, like many other countries. And everything that's going on, you can trace back to that, because all the agendas that are being played out in New Zealand politics and elsewhere, practically in every Western country in the world, are driven by what is in the interests of those global elites and the corporations that they own and
the war machine that backs them.
Well, if you think of, the global elite mafia as being, well, like the mafia or like a global company, they have several portfolios, major portfolios. They have banking and finance. They have weaponry and war. They have big food, big pharma and big chemicals, big technology, and a huge aspect of that.
And they use all of that to fuck you if
biotechnology.
they don't like you.
Yeah, but that's what it's all about. At the core of everything is the money. It's all about that.
It's not about the population. Look at Big Pharma. I mean, look at the attacks they've had on Robert Kennedy Jr.,
Yeah.
right? Because he dares to challenge the hegemony of Big Pharma. He's saying, you've done all of these things to cure things. Here's the charts. Here's reality. You haven't cured anything. All you've done is put people on the drip feed forever. Oh, let's give you statins. Well, we need to lower your cholesterol. We lower your cholesterol so much that it atrophies your brain and causes an outbreak of dementia. It's evil what Big Pharma has been doing.
Oh,
And the doctors still push statins.
yes.
You need to take these statins. Why? My brain's made of cholesterol. You give me statins, you're making me mental.
Yes.
Well, that's what they're doing.
I know.
It's as obvious as anything. You can see it all.
Yes.
But as soon as you mention it out loud, everyone thinks you're cray-cray.
Yes, because we're in this war and deliberate neutralization of alternative information. That's where we're at. So,
I mean, the Democrats were attacking Robert Kennedy Jr., a Kennedy,
yes,
right? That is Democrat royalty, right? Who has seen the light and realized that the Democrats are not all that in a bag of chips. Actually, they're quite corrupt,
yes, like every other.
like every other political party.
Yes,
And this is the problem I see with New Zealand is we've got this stupidity where people go, I'm going to vote National because I don't like Labour.
oh, so
And then
we've got
2 years later,
Yeah.
right, now we've got the polls where people are saying, I don't like National, I'm going to vote
Mm.
Labour. That's the same Labour that fucked you over
yes,
for 6 years.
yes,
And
and they'll do it again,
and they'll do it again. Same with National, they'll fuck us over too. So
and are doing.
we're stuck. So I want people to start looking at third parties. And I don't care what third party it is. I do have a sort of a view that the Greens are fucking nuts and the Maori Party are inherently racist, which kind of leaves you with New Zealand First and Act. But I want to see New Zealand First and Act with a few percent higher and National a few percent lower, and continue with those three parties, but with a reshuffling of the portfolios.
Well, I'd have to agree with you on that, Cam. And the only thing that I think is vaguely encouraging is at the weekend, 1,000 people went to hear Winston Peters.
Yeah.
And they packed out 3 floors of that conference venue.
Everywhere he goes, he's packing out places. I think we're looking at a change in New Zealand, and I hope it happens at the next election.
I hope so. But, you know, the neutralizers of alternative opinions
And the media are the arbiters of that, and that's why.
with that. Well, they're just part of the global elite empire.
Yeah, and that's why podcasting and podcasters are the way around that.
Yeah, that's the only way.
Well, I think we're going to have to book you in for another podcast just to talk about New Zealand politics currently. But
We
it's
should.
but it's been a fascinating discussion to introduce you and your thoughts to our audience. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you coming on the Good Oil podcast.
Thank you, Cam. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you. Before we finish up, I want to have a word to you about sponsorship. Your brand needs to be on this podcast. Contact Cam at goodoil.news. Thanks for listening.
Hey, now welcome to the show, where the wind's blowing strong and the truth can flow. This is the Good Oil. Catch a vibe today with Cam Slater leading us all the way.